Okay, so we did not have class on Monday, as you all know. So what I did was post a video from a prior year on that topic. So that content may be helpful to you in doing the project, the Internet Explorer project. The stuff we would have covered on Monday, you don't need for the project, but it gives you another set of tools that might make things more helpful. So feel free to watch that video and use that if you want. Let's just go ahead and move on with the content for today, which will be interacting with Google Sheets through VBA and Excel. So we'll download that file. Ooh. And we'll begin work there. So I'm guessing you've all done a Google form. Is there anyone here who has never made a Google form? Well, that's a lot of forms if everyone's made a form. Good. So here's the idea, kind of overview for today. What we're going to do is we're going to use Google Sheets and Google Forms as a central repository. We'll push data to that repository from Excel, and then we'll pull the data back down from Excel as well. So it's just kind of a handy, free place if you've got data that you need to keep centrally, that you're kind of either collecting or retrieving from Excel, and so these tools are kind of handy that way. The truth is, mostly what we're seeing today will be helpful, if you are doing some kind of a survey, to be able to automatically pull that data down and do analysis on it, kind of from beginning to end, automated, even, with saying, hey, pull down the newest data, update our analysis, and, build some charts on it. But we'll be pushing data there as well. So let's begin by creating a Google form. So I will go there, Forms. I'll go to Google Drive. And let's see. In fact, if you already have experience, if you want to, you can build your own Google form, but it might be kind of neat if you connect onto the Google form that I'm going to make. So we'll have multiple people putting inputs into a common form, and then we'll be pulling the data down from that form. So it seems like I've got some ISD folder here. There we go. And VBA. I have two folders named VBA. That's neat. This should be a good form. So we'll create a new form. So, where this example might be really handy is if you've got, some kind of, actually one thing that might be kind of neat is if you had some kind of analysis happening, maybe some kind of simulation that you want to run on multiple machines and be able to push all the results of those simulations. Maybe you're doing thousands or tens of thousands of runs of a simulation, and you want to have multiple people working together on it. Or if you've got some kind of a system where you're collecting data from the internet, and you've got one machine working on that, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 machines in different places working on that to pull that data into to their individual machines, but then push it to a common repository. So that's the idea here. Here, let's just do maybe coin flips. COINFLIPS. All right, so our first question is going to be the flipper. And let's not make that a checkbox. Let's make that a short answer. So that'll be the name of the person. And then, let's see, I want to create a new question. And flip 1. And we'll make this, why don't we'll just do this as a short answer as well. And ultimately, we're going to put in a 1 or a 0 for, why don't we make 10 different flips. So 1, 2. Multiple choice probably work as well. But for what we're doing, we just need a place to be able to receive the data. We could do multiple choice and set up 2 choices, and you'll just select them. Truth is, I'm not exactly positive how that would look, and I know this will be general enough that this will work just fine for sure. So there's 2, 3, I don't want a picture. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we got flip 1. I may regret having decided to do all 10. Flip 2. Oh, did it switch to multiple choice? Don't go to multiple choice. Flip 3. So I was in a class one day and I'm not even quite sure why this topic came up in that class. The question was, if you had a coin, how could you tell, when you flipped it, how could you tell that heads comes up more often or less often than tails? How could you be sure of that? An interesting question. You could toss it a whole bunch of times, but what's the likelihood of that coming up exactly half and half? Pretty slim. But back then we didn't have the internet, so now we can answer that question. Three to go. We're almost there. Flip 10. Whew. Short answer. All right, so now I should be able to preview this. Oh, and let me go ahead and give you a place where you can give me some data as well. Unable to create short URL. There we go. Okay, so that's the URL you should be able to type in pretty easily. Case is going to matter, and you should be able to go to that form and enter in a 1 or a 0 for those. So I'm going to be the flipper who's reporting this. If I had a coin to flip here, it would probably be 1 for heads, 1 for heads, got a couple of tails, 1 for heads. So we're just recording that information coming in. I'll say submit, and I can submit another response, but I'm hopeful that we've got a couple other people who have made responses by now. I'll come back to the form and now view the responses. We've got 8 responses. And so someone got 0, flip 1. We got 13 responses. Oh, someone typed in heads. Heads, that's okay. Most of you are you're on topic here for 1s and 0s. That's fine. That's what I get for allowing a free response. You're going to get whatever you're going to get. That's okay for this example. Okay, so what I want to begin with is saying, how can we pull this data automatically into Excel? Now, it's pretty easy as long as we don't mind publishing the data. So if we want this data to be secret and behind a password to get to the data, like you have to authenticate to pull the data down, that's possible to do from VBA. It's way beyond the context of this whole course, let alone the example for today. But if we're okay just publishing this data, then that should be just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my responses, and I'm going to create a spreadsheet here with these responses. Create a new sheet, that's fine. I'll create that sheet. And once I've got these responses shown as a spread, hey, where's my chair? I have no chair. I gotta stand all day. It's pretty tough. Okay, King Kappa, you're getting deleted with the heads here. Control minus. Delete row. Okay. So here what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say I'm ready to publish this. So file, where is it? Publish to the web, and publish it as a web page. That sounds great. Oh, an entire document. There's only one sheet there, so that's fine. We'll publish the entire document. Are you sure you want to publish it? Yes. Again, it's kind of a long URL. I'm not sure shortening this one's going to be a good idea. Where did my Google URL shortener go? Oh, thank you. It'll probably work for what we're about to try to do. If not, we'll have to get the whole URL out. Okay, so now that we have a URL that can go that we can just use to go directly to that published data, this should get pretty easy. Because now I should be able to just pull this in with a web query. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let's come back to our workbook that I downloaded. Did I download it? I may not have downloaded it yet. I thought I did. There it is. Okay. So I've got too many things open. Take a minute and close my other workbooks. Ah, my chair has arrived. Thank you. There's Google Sheets. Well, what else do I have? What's this crime analysis stuff doing here? I don't see it. Okay, we'll just work around it. So in Google Sheets, we should have a module called Module 1. And we'll work here. Get that reference to. Oh, here's one. We may come back to this example here in a bit. Let's make a new sub-procedure just called get coin data. Now, over here in the mod web query, I don't know if we've seen this module before. It seems like we may have used this once before, but basically we just have a sub-procedure here that will create a web query and pull the data in without us having to record the web query to do it. So it's called create web query. You give it a destination range, and you give it a URL, and that's all you need to bring in. So get web query. Oh, create web query. Just went there, wasn't paying attention. I'm just going to put it on A1 of whatever the active sheet is. So range A1. And then I'll give it the URL. Let's just see what that pulls in. So here is the data from those 44 responses that we have put in here. All right, questions to this point? So far, nothing really new. You all created a form before. Now we've got a form out there with some data going into it, and we have a way to pull that data in and to refresh that data. So the next step is for us to be able to fill out an entry to that form, not by someone going to the web page, but by having that process happen right here in Excel. So let's take a look at the process for that. So the first thing is we need to understand a little bit more about how this data happens as it's transmitted. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to, let me just tell you, I'm going to look here at flip 1. So I'm going to inspect this. I'll right click and choose inspect. And that should look somewhat familiar to you. We've been working with the Object Inspector Internet Explorer. It's pretty similar here in Chrome. So input type is text. That's the kind of text box it is. Now we should be looking for a property called name. So here's the name. That's going to be important to us because that's how we're going to, when we send a request to push this data to the Google backend, we're going to have to know that's the name it's expecting to find out. That's the name that it's expecting to be able to see this submission. So let me come to the network tab. We haven't done this part before, though. This is new. So the network tab in this, I'm not sure what this is really called, this inspector, will let us see information that's sent to and from the web server as it's interacting with this client. So I'm going to come here and fill out another one. So Thomas Paine manages to flip all heads. And I'm going to submit that, and we should be able to see that we get all kinds of data that comes in here. So kind of every response that comes back from the server, everything that we send to the server is getting logged here. I'm going to come to this first one, form response, and this now is going to show me kind of the lower level details about what got sent. So here's the URL that we're communicating with. The request method is post. When we're sending information to a web server, there's two ways we can do it. By post, well, there's more than two ways, but the main two ways we do it by post and by get. The default here is by post. And what post means is that what we're sending is going to change that server that we're interacting with. And that's what's happening here, right? Because we're sending some data, that data is going to get recorded. And so that's what that method means. Now, if we're just sending it some information so it can tell us some information back, we're trying to give it the information so it can know what part of the database to show me information from. That's typically done with get. The big difference between post and get from what you see is that when you send a post request, the parameters that you send go in the body of the request. So you don't see them in the URL, but when you send a get request, you do see them in the URL. And you've noticed that, right? Sometimes you look at the URL and it's got all kinds of parameters in it, and then sometimes it doesn't. That's usually the difference between a post and a get request. Let's look down here a little bit lower, and we should see all the fields that we sent. So here's the form data. So those are the names of the fields. We saw this one. We actually looked that one up. If you built this form, no doubt your names are different, right? These are just generated names. And then here's the data that is sent as well. Okay, so typically, if you've got a server set up to receive information, even if it's configured to receive or expecting to receive that information by post, we can also send that information by get. So let's take a look at what that means. Let me come up here and let's come back to our VBA, make another sub-procedure called put coin data. And I'm going to do this with a web query as well. And we may see a different approach to do it. You're kind of depending on how smoothly this goes. But let me go ahead and make a new sheet. So sheet 1 will be where we're pulling our data from. Sheet 2 will be where we're getting the response back. No, let's leave it all in sheet 1. I'll just put this response out here past the data. So I'll put it over here in R1. So web query as well. I'm going to tell this one to put its response in R1. But now, instead of sending it there, oh, and this is going to be ugly because I think we are going to need to use that whole URL. So let me see if I can post this on Learning Suite so that you can download it. Without having to type the whole thing because it'll be picky. Actually, yeah, that's a good idea. So let me go ahead and I will just make a short URL for this. And then when you follow it there, it will show the real one, right? So yet one more short URL. And so that should translate to, yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that's going to work. I guess because we didn't send the information with it. I want to make sure I pulled the right one. Form response. Yeah, I think that's right. And does this show as form response? It might have redirected somewhere else. No, that didn't work. It's redirecting again. So I'm going to have to post this somewhere where you can see the whole, where you can copy the whole form, the whole URL. So I'll just do it on Learning Suite. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But you need the other URL that's not redirected. So let me just put that here. Oh. Okay, you should be able to refresh Learning Suite and pull that URL down. And that is the URL that we're going to pass. We need to do a little bit more work on it, so let me go ahead and declare a variable. That's the URL. But of course, I've got to build in the data from the parameters as well. So let's take a look at that. In fact, come here. There's my URL. I'm going to come back to this form. And I'll come down here to these parameters. So these are the parameters that are displayed in a human readable format, but I can view the source. And so this is the block of data that includes all of that data that's shown. So I'm going to come in here and just put a question mark after the URL and then paste on that whole set of parameters. So yeah, it might be that the best way to get here is to actually go through this process of doing the network again. So I'm guessing some of you didn't follow me on the network part. Is that right? Let's do that again so that you can do it. You'll need to do that to be able to get this data brought in. So let's come back to the form, coin flips. Submit another response. Let's go ahead and fill this out, but don't submit it yet. Give you a minute to get that filled out. Right-click anywhere on the page, choose Inspect, and then go to the Network tab. You probably aren't currently showing anything there, but if you want to erase what's there, you can click the Clear button, which is this button here. And then once you've got the Network tab showing, and you submit, then you'll get this information that we need. So I'm going to come open up form response, and then you can pull the URL here, and choose view source at the very bottom for the form data, and that will give you the data in the raw format. Ooh. And the whole point then is to be able to get this long URL, which has all the information that gets us to the right resource on the server, question mark, and then all the parameters that we're sending to that resource. So I should be able to take this whole thing, which is now a GET request, because the parameters are part of the URL, and just open up a new page and submit. I'll just paste that URL here, hit enter, and the response has been recorded. So that information that's all encoded in there has been recorded. And if we look at it, here's what we see. Here's my first entry, entry number 1829, which incidentally is the year that Thomas Paine died. And then here's, Thomas Paine. The next entry is this one, and that equals 1. And the next entry is 1. They were all 1 for this particular one. If I wanted to change this to do another Thomas Paine entry that had 1 0 in it, I could just change that to 0, and then drop this into the URL of a browser, and that one would get recorded as well. Okay. So that's the process that we have to duplicate from inside of Excel. This is just a web request, the same way that we do a web request for a web query. But it has built into it data that the the web server will record when it arrives. So I'm just going to take from my Network tab of my Explorer, I've got the data showing in view source for form data at the very bottom here, from my very first option here, form response. I'm changing it to view source. I'm going to copy all of that and come back to my code. So I'll go ahead and declare another variable. I'll call this one params. And depending on what we're trying to do here, there's lots of ways that we can kind of build up this full URL. I'm just going to do it in a way that I think is somewhat expedient. Params equals, and then I'll drop this whole long string in here. Whew. And now I'm just going to come, similar to when we made the database queries to insert data, I'm just going to put some parameters in here that I can change out. So I'm going to put in here name. And I'll just do it in uppercase inside of angle brackets. There's nothing special about the angle brackets. Ultimately, I'm going to replace that with the value that I actually want to go in there. And then I will have V1 through V10. That I'm replacing right after the equal signs on the rest of these parameters. So right where I've got 0 on each one of these, I'm replacing V3, V4, V5, 6. I think I put that slash in by mistake. 8, 9, 10. And I'm not sure what the rest of these parameters are, but they seem to work okay. We'll leave it just as it is. Okay, so now I've got to bring this information in somehow. So I'm going to need to pull this in. And I wish I gave myself a little more room. I guess I'll start here in AA. And I'm just going to put here some parameters. Here's where I'm going to create my roles. So this will be rand between 0, 1. And I'll go A through J. That should give me my 10 random numbers. Now I just need to drop those ones and zeros into my URL. Whew. I guess I'm just going to leave, well, we'll just hard code my name into the code here. So params equals replace, look at params, look for something, replace it with something. What are we looking for? We're looking for name, and we'll replace it with gov. Incidentally, you may have noticed space is not allowed. In space and a whole bunch of other characters are not allowed in URLs. For instance, the equal sign is not allowed to be inside of a value because the equal sign means something to a URL. So those have to be encoded. We'll see how to encode these later today. But for right now, if you're going to put a space in your name, just put a plus in. That's the way you encode a space in a URL encoded URL. Okay, now I've got to replace v1 through v10, and I would rather do that with a loop. So declare another variable, dim x as an integer, or x equals 1 to 10. And we'll have another replace in here. All right, so I am looking for first time through v1. So I'll concatenate x into this. And I want to replace that with range z1 dot offset 0 rows and x columns. So the first time through, this should do a replace. Looking at params, it should find v1 and replace it with whatever cell is 1 to the right of z1, which I think is AA. Yeah. So we're offsetting 1. That'll pick up this one. The next time through, it'll pick up this value, and so forth. I'm going to run it right to there just so I can get a look at those params and make sure it looks like it ran out correctly. So it's put in the gov Allen and it's put in the numbers. So there's got a 1 and a 0 and a 0 and so forth. I think we're ready to submit that. Oh, but I have to actually put this together. So I'm going to submit that to URL concatenated with a question mark, concatenated with params. And this is going to bring back the response from the server into R1. So I'm expecting to see something that says the response has been recorded, with some other text in there. And here it is. So coin flips, your response has been recorded. Submit another response. This is all just the text that came back. Now, this data only gets updated every 5 minutes from Google, but I've got 45 responses there. I should be able to come back and refresh my getCoin data. And as long as that's updated at least once, since we started, we should have more data. Yeah, so we've got some more data in there. Now we should just need to, probably would make sense for our put coin data to do a refresh each time. A recalculate. I'm not sure where recalculate is. It must be part of the workbook. Workbook dot. Is there a recalculate? I think it's a worksheet. Active sheet dot recalculate. I might have to go Google it. Excel VBA recalculate. Worksheet recalculate method. C-A-L-C-U-L-A-T-E. Oh, it's not recalculate, it's just calculate. There we go. So, right now, what do I have? 1, 1, 1, 1. Oh, 5 ones and a couple of zeros. If I run that code again, it should force a recalculation. And then upload that data to Google. Yeah, now I've got 0, a couple of 1s, and a 0. So I could just keep running that one, and it would keep pushing data up. So that is putting the data there. I guess if we go look at that data online, this should update immediately. Looks like those are my 2, and we've got some others in there. 109. Okay. Questions on this overall approach? How many of you are going, I think I get this? How many of you are going, you lost me as soon as you went to those params? No, a little bit, maybe a little half and half. So let's take a look at another approach to actually pushing this data up to Google. Sometimes it is possible for that web server to say, no. I'm expecting this data to be posted to me, and if you send it to me by GET, I'm just going to ignore it. Sending data by post is a little bit more complicated. And so let's just try to see how to do that. But it's a good skill to have. I mean, one thing that you could do already with the skills that you have is you could take Internet Explorer, navigate to this page, find all the values, put it in, submit. That would work. It's slow, and if you want to do it faster, let's take a look at this other approach. So, as you may have guessed, there are other objects that we can use to interact with web servers. And this MS XML HTTP object is one of them. So I think we already have the reference added in this workbook, but if you're going to start from a new workbook, you'll have to add the reference. Let's just check really quick. tools, references, yeah, Microsoft XML version 6. And let's just go ahead and run this one. So this is just pulling the home page from BYU. And going to dump it here into the immediate window. So there's the BYU store, byutv.org, and so forth. I'm going to copy this example, and I'm going to just call it put data. Actually, what I'll do is I will cut the guts out of this, and I will put it into our other one where we're already manipulating the URL and the params. I'm going to comment out the line that is sending it by creating the web query. And this is going to be now another block of code that will send that information to the web server. So let's just take a look at this. We'll just kind of go through this. So we have a reference to this object, the Microsoft XML object. And we don't need to declare the URL because we've already built the URL. Okay. And so here's the basics of it. You open the object first, but this, often when you think open, it's like we're opening the web page. That's not what's happening here yet. When we say open, we're saying, let's open this request, but we haven't sent the request yet. So we're gonna get the request configured. And there can be a lot of things that we have to do to configure the request. We're not going to cover it today, but you can set different headers on that request. You can set cookies on the request and so forth. So you have to open it, get it configured the way that you want it, and then send it. And so here, I'm going to send this, same thing, URL concatenated with a question mark, concatenated with params. The response now, instead of being written out to the worksheet, should just come back to my immediate window, but I should be able to see that same thing. It should be the whole HTML page that comes back, but I should still see that same stuff in it. That is, just the response, submit a new response. Your response has been submitted successfully. So I'll run this and we'll see what it brings back. Ooh, report abuse. Here it is, coin flips. Should find something that looks familiar. Oh, did you see that already? Ah, the response has been recorded. So this tool here is totally non-visual. When we're working with the Internet Explorer object, we can say, make this thing visible so I can see it. This object, there's no visible part of it. It's just sending information to a web server and allowing you to get the information back. But now we can send it by post, because here we can specify we're not going to send this by get, we're going to send it by post. In this case, we do not send the params as part of the URL. Instead, we send it as a part of the body. We don't need the question mark, just params. And so when we say send, there's a parameter here that we can tell it what to send. What's the body of the request? And that's what goes here. And so this should then be a post request. So if we get back the same kind of thing here, we'll know that it worked. Looks a little bit different, which makes me think I might have something wrong. Oh, your response has been recorded. So now we're using this to send a post request off to that server. The truth is, most servers will accept that even if it's set up to receive it as a post, most will accept it as a get, And that's almost the way I always do this. First check to see if it goes as a get, and then just send it as a get. But if you have to send it as a post, this will do the trick. Let's go ahead and that's the stuff I wanted to cover for today. We have a little more time, so let's pick up on some of the stuff that we missed on Monday. So I introduced to you a tool on Monday in that video, which I think is here. Yeah. So there's a class module. Have we seen a class module before? I don't think I brought in a class module. What a class module is, and you can create your own class module, insert class module. We won't in this class. But what a class module is, it's the definition of an object. So we can create our own object definitions from scratch, and that's done inside of a class module. And so this parser module is it's an object that I've created that has stuff handy for working with web servers, for dealing with the data that comes back from a web server, dealing with HTML. And so we've got some properties here. There's a property called text. There's a property called position. And let's just kind of see how those work. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to, instead of printing the results of this response text, I am going to, let's first declare dim p as a new parser. That will create an instance of the object that's declared here in the parser module. Now I'm going to say p.text equals whatever came back from the request that we sent. So we're using this HTTP object. We're posting data to this URL. We're setting these parameters. And whatever comes back, we are then just putting into this parser's text property. The whole idea behind this parser is, imagine that you have a text editor. So let me take the word wrap off of this. Put the word wrap back on. Okay, so this is pretty ugly, but imagine that we wanted to go through this, and we should be able to have some structure for this. It's kind of bigger than I thought it would be. So here are some HTML tags that we're familiar with. Script, body. Let's see if we can find where it says your response has been recorded. Okay, so we've got something here called class Freebird, form viewer response. So this looks like it happens in multiple places. So let's suppose that what I'm interested in finding out is I want to find out what the names of these are. Form viewer, view, response, confirmation message. So I want to know what all of these different classes are. These Freebird classes. So if I was doing this right here inside this text editor, I'd come to the top, I'd say find class Freebird. There's the first one. There's one called light background. There's one called form viewer view format content wrapper. There's one called form viewer something, and so forth. So there's a bunch of them here. But I can iterate through each one of those, just looking for all those different things. That's what this parser does with VBA. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, listen, let's set the position back to the top. So set that to the very first character. Now I'm going to move to the first occurrence of that. p.move to, and that's the string I'm moving to. Now, we've got a quote inside a quote terminated string, so I've got to double that one up. And that should, if it's successful, it should move the position to right where that text is. So if I do a debug.print of p.position, I should now see that. You go ahead and put a breakpoint on the end, and I'll run this code. So I set the position to 1. I said find the first occurrence of class quote Freebird, and it found it at the 84,000th character in that file that came back. If I tell it to move again to it, it will move to the next occurrence of it, and it found that almost 900 characters later. Now, I can then extract text out of that response HTML file by saying, let's see, I want to pull everything out here now until this quote. Well, there's a function for that. We declare a variable here. Now we'll just print it. We'll print the position, and then we will print p.getText. And then I'm going to go up to the quote. This looks a little strange. It's a string literal, so it's going to have quotes at the beginning and the ending. And what am I going to put in the inside? A quote, but there's got to be 2 of them, so it looks like quote, 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 quote. Or thank you. Or tell it to look for character number 34. Character number 34 is that quote. And so form, viewer, that's one of the things I'm looking for. I come back here and run that again, it should find the next one. And the next one, and so forth. Unless it failed to find it. And then we'll pull something different in. So it's important to know if we're able to find that next value or not. So this move to does something interesting. And that is, it reports whether it found what you were looking for or not. You can say question mark, move to, now it's a function, so I've got to put parentheses around it. And that says true, it was able to find it. So it's advancing through. Eventually, I'll run out of these, and it'll tell me false because it will move to the end of the file. But the point is that I can, because that returns true or false, I can use this to control a loop. So I'm going to do while I can move to that Freebird string. I'll put a loop in. And now I should be able to run this loop, set the position back to the top of the file, run through this loop, and it should print off the location and what it found at each one of those locations. So the first one it found was light background, and that's the set it found. So this is kind of boring data to pull back. If you're interested, we can do another example that's some more interesting data. But that's the basics of how this text parser works. You've got some structure that you can look at. You can advance to the next position, read the data off until it finds another specified character or a set of characters, and pull that data out. Can be very this class can be very handy when you have to parse text files, and it's specifically designed for working with HTML. There's some things that it can do. For example, let's suppose that we weren't hard coding. I'll go ahead and finish this off. I'm going to move the definition from my parser up to the top because I'm going to want to use it a little bit earlier. So let's suppose that we were pulling this out of Z1. So the user is going to be able to plug this value in. Now, problem is here, whatever someone puts in Z1 might need to be encoded. So here in Z1, I'll put in Thomas O'Malley. So we'll definitely have to encode the space. I think we'll have to encode that quote. Oh, but how do you encode the quote? Fortunately, the parser can do that for us. So the parser has a URL encode method. So we'll now call p.url encode. We'll pass whatever's in Z1 to it. It will return the encoded version of it, and that's what will drop into the string. So I should be able to run that again. And run it one more time so we can just take a look at what that URL looks like, or what the params look like. So there's the encoded Thomas O'Malley. The space gets turned to a plus, that single quote gets turned to a %27. And that's the way that information is put into a URL so that it can be read properly by the server. Questions here? Yeah. So here's where we said we need to encode that value before we can put it into the URL. And for this to work, we had to move the declaration of the parser up above this. So when I plugged it in for convenience, I plugged it in low, but now that we're using it up here, I had to bring it up. And of course, we can use this parser with anything that brings back text. So whether I'm using Internet Explorer, and once I've got the Internet Explorer object onto a certain page, I can just ask for like the body tag of the document, take that data out, drop it into the parser's text property, and then use this text parser to work through all that text. We want to see another example of the parser, or do we want to call it good for the day? If you need more, you can watch the video, which is posted on Monday's day. That's a good point. All right, that's it. Thanks for coming to class. Class dismissed.